In today's video, we're going to be making some little mushroom boxes, little containers that you can put trinkets or jewelry in and put them on your bedside and put your rings in it, something like that. I've been making these little decorative mushrooms at the farmer's market and they've been a big hit this year, but a lot of people want to try and open them up and see if there's anything inside. So today we're going to make something that you can take the lid off of and actually put something inside. I'm Jason Geiser and this is Geiserwoodturner. So let's make some mushroom boxes. We're going to start out by mounting our rounded top onto the lathe. This is a waste block that we're going to use to mount it, and I've glued this nut inside that fits my spindle. And this way I can take this waste block on and off, and I can glue other pieces to it. But I usually leave this as a flat surface that I can use this double-sided tape on. And this is a double-sided tape that I get from a woodworking supplier that's meant for wood turning. And we'll put that on here. And it's pressure sensitive, so if you put the wood up to it and you leave some pressure on it for a little while, it's going to hold really well. I don't use anything very large with this tape. I don't turn anything very large because it's got a bigger chance of coming off of there. So I like to keep it at about 4 inches or less. So the top of our mushroom is going to be this little 2x2 by maybe 1.5 inch block of walnut. And I only really need to mark one side of it because the other side I'm going to stick to the tape. So we'll go ahead and put 4 lines on it. In the middle of those 4 lines will be where we pop our center, just as a reference point. Okay, and then we'll put that on the tailstock and slide that up into the tape. Try and get as much of the tape on the wood as you can. We'll advance the tailstock into the tape and then just let it hold that pressure for a little while. Get that really sticking good. Now, I like to use my bowl gouge when I'm doing something like this because it's in a side grain configuration, so I'm going to be running into side grain, end grain, side grain. And if I use something like my spindle roughing gouge to rough this to round, it's going to want to grab whenever that end grain comes around and tear chunks off. And it might do that anyways with a bowl gouge, but you have less chances of taking big pieces off. You're going to get a nice cleaner surface when you get done with it. So we'll just take a little pass at a time. Just come across towards our waste block and try and get that to round. You can see there's still some flat spots on it, so we'll just take it down a little bit farther. You want to use as much of the wood as possible here, or even use a larger piece to make your mushroom look pretty good when you're done. We'll go ahead and make one more pass here. Make sure we're completely round before we move on. That looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and start setting up for the next step. And I'm going to flatten the end of this. The reason that I've mounted it on the tape so I can completely get to the end here and hollow it or flatten it or do whatever I need to do to make sure that I can turn this around and have a secure way to hold it onto the lathe. We'll go ahead and just do a scraping cut with the bowl gouge on that wing, just scraping across, making it as flat as I can. Making it so that I can put a recess here. And we're going to make a jam chuck, but we're going to use the body of our mushroom or the stem of our mushroom to put this top onto. So this will be the joint between our two different woods or two different species of wood. And as you can see, it's stuck pretty well. I really don't have to do anything to that tape. It's going to hold very well. Now I'm going to use my bowl gouge to just kind of round this bottom side just a little bit. I don't want to round too much because I want to be able to have enough space to put a little recess in the middle. But I just kind of want to shape it and make it look like a mushroom. I'm just doing a pull cut across the process, just similar to what you do on the bottom of a bowl. Only I'm turning at a much faster speed because it's a smaller object. So we're going to go ahead and start to make our recess, and I'm using my 3/8 spindle gouge here. And since we're side grain, I'm going to cut this much like I'm making a bowl. So I'll start out in the middle and work my way out a little bit. I'm not going to be able to do all this recess like this, but we'll remove a little bit of material first just to get it out of the way. Make a nice flowing curve, and then we'll go from there and see if there's something else that we can do. I'm going to get out my custom box scraper now that I love to use for making recesses and sidewalls in boxes. And I'm just going to plunge that in just a little ways here. Just follow the sidewall down as if I'm making the bottom of a box. But I just want a 90-degree edge here so that I can have something to slip over the tenon that I put on the stem of the mushroom. So just take that in about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 5/16. And then I've got this rounded edge on my scraper that I can just roll over and use as a scraper to hollow out some more in the middle of that. So I'll come down 90 degrees and stop. I'll roll it over and kind of round and dome that top just a little bit on the inside, just to make it look kind of interesting. I don't want it to be just perfectly flat, although you can do that if you wish. At this point, now that I have a recess in there, I have the opportunity to sand that just a little bit. I want to keep it away from my 90-degree edge as much as possible, but I can smooth out this rounded part that I'll have on the bottom and that recess a little bit. But I don't want to widen out or change the shape of that 90-degree edge that I put on there. All right, we can go ahead and remove this off of the lathe. And now we're going to see just how well this tape holds. And the key is to just put some side pressure on it and hold it. And to see if we can get that to pop off of there. And you can see it really takes a lot of effort. So I feel really safe using this stuff. In fact, some of the wood's still stuck to the tape. So it's a pretty secure hold. Now we can start on the body of our box or the stem of our mushroom. And I've got this piece of maple. I think it's Western maple, soft maple. And it's about 2 inches by 2 inches by about 5 inches. And 5 inches might be a little bit long, but we'll go ahead and mark centers and we'll get this round and make it so that we can put it into a chuck. With our block mounted on the lathe, we need to go ahead and round that. So we'll turn it on to about 2,000 to 2,500 RPM, and we'll get out the spindle rough and gouge and just take a few passes a little at a time until we're down to where we're round. Okay, and then we have to put a tenon on the end so that I have something to hold it in the chuck with. My preferred method of making a tenon for the chuck jaws is to use a peeling cut with the skew chisel like this. You can use a parting tool or whatever you wish. I kind of got used to the diameter that I need to fit my chuck jaws on about a 2-inch spindle, which is what this is. And so I don't have to measure, but you can always stop and use your calipers and measure and make sure you're getting a really good fit on your tenon so that you fit your chuck jaws and it won't come out of there. So this piece of maple will be the box part or the container part of our mushroom, and it's in the stem. So we're going to start to shape this, but we're going to want to leave as much as possible so that we can actually make a useful container that you can actually put things in, because this is a kind of a small size. You don't have to do one that's this small. You can always use these same steps to do something that's a little bit bigger, something that you could put like rings in or something of a larger size. But I like these little tiny trinket boxes. I think they're really kind of fun. So we'll go ahead and turn on the lathe. And with the spindle rough and gouge, I always make sure that I'm round again, because when you put something in a chuck, it's never remounted the same way that it was before. So I just true everything up and make sure that we're good to go. Then I can come back and start to shape the body of the mushroom just a little bit. Before I get too far though, I want to go ahead and cut a tenon on the end of this that's going to match our lid or the top of our mushroom. And so I've measured that size with some calipers. I'm just going to hold it up there and do some guesswork here. This is the part that you really want to slow down and take your time and make sure this fits correctly. So I've measured with my calipers to get me pretty close. So I want to stay over that. And kind of like the opposite of the Price is Right, you want to get it close without going under. So we'll just keep checking until we get it really close, and then I can remove the tailstock and we'll go ahead and hold our piece right up to it and make sure that it fits correctly, and then we're going to get a good tight fit to jam that onto there and hold it, because we're going to turn it on the end of this tenon. We want that to fit as close as possible. Now you can always make this tenon really, really thin, like 1/8 of an inch, and then widen it out a little bit more to get a good hold. That way, if you undercut it, then you can always just take this part off and you're not removing a lot of wood to have to make a new tenon with. If you do a really wide tenon to start with, then you're going to have a hard time. You might start running out of wood the more times you mess up and make mistakes. So we're getting to where we're really close here. And I can get it over part of the end. So I'll go ahead and just tuck that tenon in a little bit farther so that it's nice and straight instead of angled. Still getting to where I'm just getting over the end. So just want to angle that back towards the shoulder a little bit, towards the headstock. Just kind of whittle that diameter down until it will fit. And as you can see, this takes a lot of trial and error to get this fit right, but it really makes a lot of difference in how that works. Now I'm close, so I'm going to widen it out a little bit. Just take a little bit at a time. You can see just a few shavings coming off, starting to fit a little bit deeper. Actually make this a little bit wider. Cross a couple of times here, which is probably one too many. I usually only do 1 cut or 2 cuts, and that's it. Luckily, I'm still wider than the mortise here. So we'll go ahead and just easy going. Took a cut there. Angled it more towards the inside, and we're getting a better fit, but we still need just a little bit more. So as you can see, this is probably the part of the process that takes the longest. There's really no substitute for it. A mushroom box is probably something that someone's going to pick up the top of, and they're going to want that whole mushroom to come with it. There we go. We got a nice fit on that. But if you're doing just a regular jewelry box, you can do this step, but then sometimes you want to loosen up that fit just a little bit so that the lid will come off right away, because some people want to just lift the lid off of the box. This one you're going to want tight so that it stays together as one solid mushroom when you're done. So I'm going to just make sure that I'm not bottoming out here. That looks pretty good. I think we can stick with that shoulder and we're not going to have any problems here. Now before we move on, I'm just going to take the skew chisel and do a peeling cut across the face to flatten it and get ready for the next step. It's time to shape our lid or the top of our mushroom. So let's jam that on there really nice and tight and bring up the tailstock. And then we'll go ahead and turn on the lathe and start to shape this. I'm going to go at it with my bowl gouge again because there's this little square chunk on the end. We'll just take that off a little at a time. Go ahead and just make sure that this is all the way around. and then take a step back and look at it for a minute. Looking at this, I think this is still just a little bit thick. Unless I want like a round ball mushroom on the end, I want to kind of bring down the thickness a little bit. So I'm going to put a pencil mark of where about I want the top to be. So all the rest of this I'm just going to cut off. Go ahead and just take the bowl gouge and make a few passes down to that line. That'll give me an idea of the shape that I want to have on the top here. Go ahead and make some pull cuts across the surface and just round that a little bit. Starting to get to where I like that. But I think it needs just a little bit more. And we'll just try and blend that in really well. Now really, as you're thinking about doing one of these mushroom boxes, you can make any shape that you want. You don't have to follow what I'm doing here. I'm making it a little bit more rounded on top, but if you have a little bit wider piece of wood and you'd like to make this stick out from the base just a little bit more, like a lot of mushrooms that I've seen, you can definitely do that and you can shape it however you want. But I like this rounded shape because I have a lot of pieces of wood that this fits with. A lot of small 2-inch pieces of wood. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this waste wood here on the end. I'm just going to take my spindle gouge and start taking a pass on each side and making a V, just kind of whittling it down to where there's just a really, really small piece there on the end. I really want to get that down to where it's the size of a toothpick or something like that. But before I do, I'm going to take my skew chisel, lay it on its side, and use it as a scraper to kind of blend all these curves together. And I'm just taking really light cuts, light pressure to get these thin little shavings off of there and just kind of blend everything together so I don't have to do as much sanding later. Now I can come back with my spindle gouge, just kind of take some more cuts and get that down really close and put a little pressure on it. And it was so thin it went ahead and just busted off anyway. Sometimes that will break off into the wood and you might have to remove a little bit more wood on top, but this one broke off pretty evenly. Just to let you know that happens sometimes, but I can get to the end now since it's jammed on there, and I can clean that up however I want to. If you're doing this, you want to make all the cuts pushing towards the headstock, so that's not going to put any side pressure on there and make that lid want to come off of there. So I'm just going to take one final cut here and try and blend everything together. Make sure my curves are just how I want them. And then I think we're ready to sand and our lid will be done. Go through the grits how you normally would. I usually start at 120 and work my way to 400 grit on something like this. Let's go ahead and pop that lid off of there, and then we'll bring up the tailstock for some support while we do some preliminary shaping of the body of our box, or the mushroom stem on the outside. Now, the reason that I shape this first is so that I can have an idea of how thin I can make this stem. So I'm going to take my spindle gouge and start to bring this down without hitting the tenon. I just need to leave a little shoulder so that the lid has something to seat on when it hits the bottom of this. So I bring it down really close to that tenon without hitting it. And then I need to kind of get an idea of where I want the bottom of the box to be. Like how deep can I hollow into this? And so I'll just make a series of cuts to kind of round off that bottom and then remove some waste material, just so I can get an idea of what this mushroom's going to look like. So I don't make a hole all the way through the bottom. Now I'm just going to take some time and refine this shape a little bit more till it's where I like it. Does it look like a mushroom? Kind of. I can't get it too thin like the stem of a mushroom, but I'm going to do the best I can to make it look fairly good, but leave enough body into it that I can actually put things on the inside. So it's kind of a fat little stem mushroom. Just refine that shape. get it down to where I think the bottom will be. I think that looks pretty good right there. I'm now ready to make this into a box. It's going to have a recess inside so that we can hold things. It's actually going to be a container. So I'm going to drill this out. There's lots of different ways you can do this. You can hollow it out by hand. I like to use a Forstner bit because this is small and it's not something that really has to be finished down in the bottom of it anyways. Forstner bit will cut a nice clean hole, and you can size it to make the size of hole that you want. Now you want to choose something that's a little bit smaller than the tenon that you have put on the outside, but you want to leave a little bit of meat there between your tenon and your hole, your recess. You don't want to make that paper thin or it'll just fall apart on you. But you want to make that hole big enough so that you can actually put things inside of it, which is the point of making a box. I need to know how deep I want to drill. And so I'm going to just eyeball a measurement from the bottom of the box. And I want to leave about 3/8 or more on the bottom so that the point from the bottom of my Forstner bit isn't going to go through the bottom of the box, making it into a funnel instead of a box. I use this blue tape as a reference point so that I know that when I hit that blue tape, I've hit the bottom of my box. I don't want to drill any deeper so I don't go through. You can see there's a little line of Sharpie on there from another project. So tape is a little bit easier because I can remove that and I don't have to worry about is that the right place or put too many lines on there that I won't know where to stop. A couple of things to remember while you're drilling with a Forstner bit is to slow down your lathe. If I'm going that 2000 RPM, there's really going to be a lot of smoke coming out of here. It's going to get really hot. So I usually drill something this size, maybe 800-900 RPM. If I'm going to be using a larger Forstner bit, I'll definitely slow that down to like 300 or 400 RPM. It makes a big difference. Then as you go in, drill a little bit but with light pressure, and then make sure and back up and clear those shavings out of the way so that it doesn't get too jammed up in there and get stuck in the hole, and it'll stop everything up, or it'll try and spin your drill bit with the piece. Another thing that I like to do is you'll see that my hand is firmly on that chuck, and I try to make sure that that's not going anywhere, because if that does start to spin, I want to be able to grab that and make sure that nothing happens. It doesn't try and throw that chuck or drill bit out of the lathe at me. This is another good time to sand inside that hole if you can. And then sand the outside, being careful not to touch that tenon that you've already done, because we don't want it to be really loose. Remember, we want this lid to stick onto the top of this box. Let's make sure everything still fits, and that fits pretty good. You can always adjust it with sandpaper here if you need to make it a little bit looser. Now it's time to remove our mushroom body, the body of our box, off of this wood that's left over our waste piece. So I'm going to use the narrow parting tool here, and I'm just going to make a series of cuts. I'll make a cut, then another one next to it, peel away the wood, and then I'll work my way into the bottom of our box. And when I get to the bottom, I actually want to undercut that just a little bit and leave it a little bit concave. That way it sits on the outside ring on a table, and it doesn't want to act like a weeble wobble and wobble around. So I'll work this down to where I've got maybe 1/8, maybe 3/16 left. And I don't want this to break off into the bottom of the box. So I'll go ahead and grab my handy dandy pull saw, and just with a couple of pulls, that should come right off. And then I can work on the bottom here. And you can always put it in some pin jaws and cut the bottom and make it nice and smooth and sand it on the lathe. One thing that I like to do sometimes is I like to grab a drill chuck that I've mounted this sanding system into. It's a 2-inch disc. I'll slow that down and put an 80 grit paper on it, and I'll just kind of work on the corner so that I don't remove that concave that I put into the bottom, and just remove that nub on the bottom. Just turn it a few times to make sure that I'm not cutting into the outside edge. And once you get that nub removed, and it's pretty smooth with the 80 grit, you can move on to like 120, 240, and just keep working your way till that's nice and smooth. That's just more of the fast way to do it, and instead of reverse chucking it and cutting it. If you have a really high quality box, I would definitely reverse chuck it, turn it around, and cut the bottom so you get a nice clean shearing cut across the wood. Really, this is just a way to do it quickly and save time. When I get down to the finer grits, I'll usually just hand sand it to take care of anything that's left and polish it up. The last thing we need to do is to put a finish on our mushroom box, and this is a finish that I make. It's walnut oil and some natural waxes, beeswax and carnauba wax, and I like the oiled look, especially on walnut. It really darkens it up and makes it look beautiful. So we'll go ahead and just rub that into the can and then rub it all over the wood. Let it sit for a little while, sometimes wipe off the excess and let that dry, and we're good to go. I really hope that you have a lot of fun making this project. If you made it this far in the video, go ahead and give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Those things really help out the channel. Keep on making. We'll see you soon.